All right. So welcome everybody to the April 2023 Hawk presentation. And whether you can see me or not is a whole other thing, but you guys can hear me. And welcome everybody here who's in person. We're going to certainly encourage everybody to come in person from now on, so we don't have nearly the Zoom issues that we've got. I'm going to, hopefully you are seeing my Hawk presentation behind us. Let's see if that advanced. That did not advance. How about a down arrow? No, that didn't do it. How about that? There we go. All right. Fourth time's a charm. So for you guys that don't know, Hawk, we're part of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation with a first chapter in North Carolina. Now we've got upwards of 20 chapters around the state. And so we started something 17, 18 years ago, getting close to our 20th anniversary, which is pretty cool. We started at Squirrel Lake Park, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Squirrel Lake Park in a minute. We've got our Earth Day festival coming up there next month. Excuse me, next week, not this month, in just a week and a half. So if you're in the Charlotte area, come and visit us April 15th. You'll see that in a moment. There we go. Really, the big thing talking about the Wildlife Federation, National Wildlife Federation has a program certifying your yard. It's actually fairly easy to do. The real 4 things that are there are food, water, shelter, and a place to raise young. And the last little bit that isn't on the sign is to go ahead and do it in a chemically sensitive way, right? So not reaching for the chemicals first and foremost, but rather using that as arguably your last attempt at controlling something, whether it be a weed or something like that. So weeds, good example of easy weed control is using a tea kettle when you make spaghetti. Instead of putting salt all in that water when you boil your corn or spaghetti. Take that hot water and go dump it on your driveway or in weeds, and that'll scald them and kill them. And you don't have to use chemicals, and you've already paid for that water, so don't need to go buy something else. We're a volunteer organization, and as such, the folks who help put on these presentations and our Earth Day celebration and our Kids in Nature Day and the different workshops and whatnot that we have. We could use your help. So come join us in any capacity that you like. You don't have to be the treasurer or secretary, but you could just come and help us with snacks, or help us organize one of our presenters, or bring presenters to us. Let's see, that didn't, oh, there we go. I went a little too far. All right, we went there. Okay, so Earth Day, that's coming up April the 15th. And we've got a bit.ly link over here, bit.ly Earth-Day 2023. If you'd like to volunteer, we've got opportunities for folks to help us out, giving away snow cones and giving away seed packets and helping kids with crafts and fun stuff like that that's coming up in April. Coca-Cola is bringing rain barrel and kits to hook it up to your downspout. We've got tree sapling giveaways. The Charlotte Woodworkers Guild are going to bring a whole bunch of birdhouse kits that the kids can hammer together. That'll be a good one for you. And it's a lot of fun. So come and join us April 15th. And if you want to volunteer, come join us that way as well. Last month, if you didn't see our presentation on Zoom, or if you weren't here, we had 4 falconers who brought their birds, actually 3 falconers, 4 birds, Cooper hawks, as well as red-tailed hawks. And this picture always cracks me up. You think of these birds as being really big, and these birds were quite large. So if you weren't here for the presentation, or if you didn't see it on Zoom, it's available on our YouTube channel. You can find it through our website, hawkncwf.org. But they're big and fluffy, but underneath that fluff, they're pretty skinny little chickens, right? So this picture always cracks me up of what their legs look like. But it was fabulous. So always want to thank our sponsors. Williams Subaru has been our sponsor for our Earth Day celebration for the last 6 years now. And And they are, again, our title sponsor for this year's Earth Day celebration. They're going to have a bunch of fun giveaways and a little raffle to give away at our Earth Day celebration this year. Birdhouse on the Greenway has always been a sponsor of ours as well. They're going to help us at Earth Day as well. And tonight we have a special guest it's got a great little, it looks like a rat snake. Is that a rat snake in your hand? That's a king snake. Got a king snake in his hands in this image. Matter of fact, Andrew Cole, I wanted to jump and see your bio. You've got so much in your background that I wanted to be able to read. So he's got nearly 25 years of experience in wildlife management. He currently runs Song Dog Wildlife Management. In addition to wildlife control, he's aided in wildlife research for the University of Missouri and West Virginia University, as well as worked for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission as a game land technician and specialist. He has a Bachelor of Science in Wildlife Ecology and Management with minors in General Biology and Forestry from Frostburg State University. He's a member of several wildlife societies, including Bat Conservation International. So he's going to go ahead and present on some wildlife encounters that he has had throughout his career, as well as field questions from us on raccoons and attics and all sorts of other fun stuff. So let me just get this put together right for him, and I will pass that along. Let's see if I've got the right thing that I am going to share my screen here. Just need to share the right thing. That would be this, and share. And we're on that. All right. So you should be able to theoretically just hit the down arrow button. Okay. I know it's theoretical, but yeah, it should work. All right. I'll come back and help you out.
Yeah. If I have technical difficulties, I'm definitely calling you guys.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me, and thank you to Hawk for allowing me the opportunity to speak. And thank you for your time this evening. There's at least 50 slides, so I'm going to shoot through this fairly quickly because I think we're pinched on time. But I'll preface by saying that this isn't a presentation on wildlife encounters, but it'll primarily be focused in what where most of my wildlife encounters come from, which is my day-to-day job in wildlife damage control, wildlife control. So this right here, this picture is a picture of a coyote in Noda. This coyote, it's just one of the many species I work with. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. Okay, my career started, my journey in wildlife management started on the coast of North Carolina. After college, I did some research jobs, here and there, temporary positions, but then eventually landed a position with the Wildlife Commission here in North Carolina. I lived in North Carolina before, moved away, lived in Maryland, 5th grade through college. So I don't really sound like a North Carolinian, I'm more like a hybrid. But I came back to North Carolina and had the privilege of working on the coast in District 1. There's 9 different districts in the state, where the state split up into different management zones, and District 1 I was very fortunate to work there because it's one of the most richest assemblages of wildlife in all the state. Our primary focus there was wildlife or waterfowl impoundments, but that was my official career start. We focused on game land management, so we would go into areas and manage for different species of wildlife, both non-game and game species. Again, the primary focus is waterfowl, but on the coast, and that picture there is a bear that was hit on Route 58 on the way out to Nag's Head. Part of my job duty was to collect data from any type of hunter harvest bears or road kills, just to collect information so we have a better understanding on bear populations. This picture here I pulled from Dare to Hide Adventures on Facebook. This is out in Dare County, or maybe Hyde County. But not many people know this, but North Carolina has some of the largest body weight black bears and some of the highest densities of black bears in all of North America. Over Alaska and Canadian provinces, we have humongous black bears. The biggest one I ever weighed was 692 pounds on a grain scale in Plymouth. It was a monster. It was an absolute giant bear. So we have There's another picture one. That's at least a 550, 600 pound bear, maybe more in that photo. You can tell he's a large bear because how filled out he is. But when the ears start shrinking on the bear's head, you know it's a bigger animal. But when I worked on the coast, I was there for 5 years. I was out of Edenton, but we managed everything from the Great Dismal Swamp in Virginia down to Lake Mattamuskeet, and from Williamston out to the Outer Banks. And if you ever want to see black bear and red wolves, a good place to go, one of the places I used to manage is J. Morgan Futch Waterfowl Impoundment. That was a 600-acre waterfowl impoundment on Route 64. If you're headed out towards Manio, right when you cross over the Scuppernong River between Columbia and Manio, there's a waterfowl impoundment out there that I used to manage with a bunch of other guys. And if you want to have a good crack at seeing a lot of black bear and potentially red wolves, it's a great place to go. While out there on the coast, I had all kinds of encounters with different species. Like I said, megafauna like black bear and red wolves, but lots of different herps like this canebrake rattlesnake. Some people call them timber rattlesnakes, but came across lots of different species of snakes out there. Also, like I said, our primary focus with in that district was waterfowl management. So we would trap swans and duck, different species of waterfowl. We would collect data on them, sex them, figure out which, the gender of the bird, and then ban birds and collect data just to track and see how these birds are doing. Another thing interesting about North Carolina is that 88%, there's two different populations of tundra swans. 88% of the Atlantic population of tundra swans comes to North Carolina. They come from the north slope of Alaska, migrate down. Usually it's a two-leg stop where they come across Canada, hit the Great Lakes, hit the mid-Atlantic, and kind of trickle down from there. What we would do, we would trap swans as well as green-winged teal. This was actually a really good catch. We caught widgeon, green-winged teal, pintails, a lot of different birds on that shot. We were trapping these birds and putting them in those yellow crates. And of course, we're collecting data and banding birds for research. There's a nice shot of a green-winged teal. I did a lot of photography when I lived out there. I have thousands of photos. I was overwhelmed when I made this presentation because I wanted to include so much. There's a pintail that we caught in that shot. There's a younger, kind of chunkier version of me. And I had hair, owning a business, being a father and a husband. It's gone now. So there were some hard years of wearing hats too. But I got me a couple of green-winged teal tucked in my Carhartt there. We had so many ducks, we were trying to pull them out of the net. We didn't want them to get harmed. So I was just tucking them in there because we were having to hand them off to the biologist to collect data. It was pretty interesting. We managed a lot of land. We managed over 294,000 acres. There was only 3 of us. And I still have my CDL to this day, but we operated some big equipment, tractors, dozers, excavators. That day was a bad day. I was putting in fire lines. We did a lot of prescribed burning and forest firefighting when I lived out there as part of our duty, but we'd also do prescribed burns. If you're not familiar with what prescribed burning is, you just basically, you'll burn the landscape to bring back nutrients, to cause, to create better growth. And that was one of our duties that we did there. I also in 2008 fought forest fire in Ponza Road forest fire, which I think that was about 63 square miles, 44,000 acres burned. The smoke, it was burning out in North Carolina, and the smoke was in Ocean City, Maryland. It was a pretty significant fire there, but lots of wildlife encounters there. There was the crew I was with. There's some more prescribed burning. Here's a river otter. Now, part of my duties with the Wildlife Commission, we did so much waterfowl work. We have a lot of impounded areas full of water. We have dam and dike systems, water control structures to control water. We would drain off the water and plant different types of plantings for waterfowl and different wading birds. And so as we were always controlling the water levels, we would be battling, it seems ironic, but we would be battling beaver and muskrat in our waterfowl ponds because beaver would always want to jam up and plug up and dam up our water control structures. And muskrats would burrow into the dam and dike systems. And I had a pretty scary incident. One time I had my F-250 truck with a 200-gallon tank in the back, and I drove over a muskrat hole and the whole thing collapsed, and I almost rolled the truck into the canal. So part of our duties to manage land was to, we have to manage animals as well. And that's kind of leading into what brought me into wildlife control is that whenever I started there working at the Wildlife Commission, part of my duties were to trap. We had a budget for USDA. USDA Wildlife Services is the federal version of what I do. And at the time we didn't have a budget to have them manage our beaver. So I said, I'll do it. So I started that was like really the inception of my career in trapping, trying to manage, wildlife, creating habitat for wildlife. So that's a picture of a river otter. That was one of my sites. This otter actually was going in and out. That's a beaver lodge. There's kits inside that lodge, young juvenile beaver. And this otter was going in and out and harassing them. Nature can be cruel. How did I get into wildlife control? There I am working with the Wildlife Commission. These are an adult pair of beaver that we trapped out of an area that were flooding. This guy's, we had game lands that butted up to a piece of private land, and the beaver were flooding. They stopped up a canal. So we were no longer receiving water from the wetlands to feed our waterfowl ponds, as well as like the water was backing onto private land and flooding out merchantable timber. So that's the point of this. The one thing I wanted to say about this presentation too is that, this is the balance between humanity and nature. It's not always ideal what I have to do. You don't want to have to always trap and remove and lethally remove animals, but you got to be willing to do it. The harsh reality is that you have to maintain and manage wildlife. If you let nature go on its own, it'll take over. But I'm an outdoorsman. I hunt, trap, fish.
I'm gonna go ahead and hook you up with a new mic here.
Okay.
Just put that pocket right there.
Mm-hmm.
That should be working.
Okay. All right, cool. I'm an outdoorsman. I hunt, trap, fish. I'm part of the NC Trappers Association. At the time, at the end of my career at the Wildlife Commission, I was looking to advance and work through NRCS and become a biologist. And they put a hiring freeze on the state, so I decided to leave and go into the private sector. I met a gentleman through the NC Trappers Association. He said, "Come to Winston-Salem and oversee my wildlife control division, be a supervisor," and that's how I got into wildlife control. Now, professionalism. A lot of people say, "What is a wildlife control? What do you do?" And then, they think about Billy the Exterminator or Carl from Caddyshack. But, even though our industry is not in its infancy, we are professionals for the most part. Like any other industry or anything or any services, you're going to find companies that may not do things the right way. They're unethical or they do things illegally. Nothing's perfect out there in any realm, right? But for the most part, wildlife control agents are professionals, and we have to adhere by different rules, laws, and regulations and operate ethically, humanely, and professionally. I'm a member of NACOA, National Wildlife Control Operators Association, fantastic organization for training, best management practices and standards. I have my BAT standards, structural BAT standards, and professional BAT structural professional certifications, as well as rodent management, bird management, and fantastic organization leading the way in our industry. Okay, wildlife control agents. We're a lot of things. We're not just the guys, the critter getter. We're inspectors and site detectives, properties and structures, professional solutionists. Somebody say, "Hey, I have this problem." I never know what type of problem I'm going to get. There's a lot of run-of-the-mill type services in our industry, like squirrels in the attic, for instance. But then somebody may call you and say, "Hey, I have a problem with this," and so we have to come up with a solution. A lot of times, we're managers of property, land, and wildlife. This we're not all just removing constantly. It's not always a control. A lot of times it's mitigation and management. We're removers, rescuers, and evictors, live or dead. I may be called out to do a dead animal removal from a property. I may be called out for an entrapped animal, or say a skunk with a peanut butter jar stuck on his head. It could be something that simple, or it could be a deer stuck to a fence. And also we are removers. There are times where we have to trap and remove animals. We have to sharpshoot and remove animals. Sometimes there's an absolute need for those types of things. We're guardians of health for people, property, pets, and livestock. Believe it or not, if the interactions between man and nature, there's a lot of issues there. A lot of times with zoonotic diseases, with animals contaminating spaces or contaminating a property. And so you have to come up with a solution to stop that from occurring. Exclusion specialists, carpenters, and equipment operators, consultants, and sometimes a therapist. Sometimes people have dealt with wildlife problems over and over, or they have, they're at their wits' end from hearing squirrels in their attic or something of that nature. And so sometimes we are a therapist. Brutal picture, kind of gruesome picture. That picture on the top left, a deer stuck on an aluminum fence. Those are the most deer catchingest fences I've ever seen. Those aluminum fences with the spear tops on them. If you have them, it's probably best to put some type of square rod bar over top. You could do a modification to that fence so you don't go away on vacation and come home to that. Over here, we've got a red fox that got struck by a car and then went back to its den, which was in a basement. The guy had no idea there was a fox living in his basement. And then, of course, we have sometimes emergency snake removals. And here in the bottom right, I've got a couple of raccoon pups that I got out of a chimney. And in this situation, removed the mother from the chimney and then went down and pulled the pups out of the damper, put them on the outside, reunited them. Animals can go off. That's not always the way it goes. There's lots of ways to deal with raccoons. We'll get into raccoons more. Types of properties: residential, commercial, churches, schools, municipal, industrial, agricultural, silvicultural, HOA, community, all of it. And this is a job we did. We were getting bats out of a structure here in Charlotte, running that atrium lift, which was a nightmare. Common wildlife species we have encounters with and deal with: commensal rodents, deer mice and Norway rats, eastern chipmunks, southern flying squirrel, gray squirrels, moles, pine voles, bats, big and little brown bats, and Mexican free-tailed bats are the three primary species I deal with. Aquatic mammals, muskrat and beaver, groundhog, striped skunks, possum, raccoons, predators like red and gray fox, coyotes, and occasionally, in rare occasions, bobcats, nuisance birds like pigeons, starlings, English sparrows, resident Canada geese, vultures, and woodpeckers. It's almost, I'm a big songbird lover. Part of my research with West Virginia University was going and doing neotropical songbird research. We also worked with doing wood thrush research. So I love birds. I'm a bird dork. But I put woodpeckers there because they can really tear up a house. If you see what woodpeckers can do to stucco ephes or wood-sided homes, they'll annihilate them and just cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage. Do a lot of work with snakes, primarily rat snakes, king snakes, copperheads, and others on rare occasion to be feral hogs or armadillos. And we don't see as many armadillos in Charlotte, but I think they're coming. I see more and more of them, like down around TKK and up and down that area. So I think in time we'll see more armadillos. Laws and regulations. Licensed wildlife control agents do the state. North Carolina, I get the question a lot. It's like, how come the state doesn't do this? Like between Charlotte and Raleigh alone, there would be hundreds of thousands of calls. There's no way the state has the manpower or the equipment to field calls and deal with wildlife problems. So they created the licensed wildlife control agent. You have to go take a test. You have to recertify. You have to stay up to date and trained. You have to go take a test in Raleigh, get your certification, pass a test, like I said. And then there are a wide array of federal, state, and local laws that we have to abide by. I put in here euthanasia. Like, for instance, one of the laws is like, we cannot release or we cannot relocate carnivores and beaver. So if I trap and remove a raccoon from East Boulevard, I can't take it to Mint Hill and relocate it. It's illegal to do that. The reason for that is the state doesn't want us artificially spreading diseases like parvo, distemper, rabies. And, raccoons are, say, for instance, the #1 vector for rabies. You can't tell in the early stages of the virus, if the animal's infected or not without testing it. So if I take that raccoon and from East Boulevard to Mint Hill, I could be artificially spreading a disease to other raccoons and thus kind of artificially spreading the problem. So there's a lot of rules and regulations that surround the way we operate. We have to issue depredation permits. Definition of depredation is damage, loss, endangerment. I do way more education and technical guidance on animals than actually going, oh yeah, well, you got a problem, we'll come out there. Especially with coyotes, fox, birds, all kinds of stuff, snakes. Send me a picture. I'll tell people. I've spent time on the phone talking with folks about, hey, don't, if it fits the bill of damage, loss, or endangerment, then there's not a need for us to address it. No domestic animals, dogs, cats, wild dogs, exotics. Removal and eviction services. Did I go past one? Oh no. Okay, we'll start in the most common issue animal I deal with in Charlotte is gray squirrels and attics, and mostly rodents. Okay, deer mice, southern flying squirrels, and gray squirrels. The gray squirrels are public enemy #1, and 99% of structural squirrel issues are females. The female will chew in, create a nest and nursery, and birth young, usually between 2 and 6 in a litter with lots of 3s and 4s. She'll have 2 to 3 litters a year, one in the spring. Right now, our squirrel litters are like between 1 and 6 weeks. The bell curve of birthing is kind of long. It doesn't all happen at once. But our spring litters, there's a spring litter, a fall litter, and then sometimes if the female's productive, a winter litter. And we'll go through some of the damage pictures here. There's my technician, Caden, with a couple of juvenile squirrels from about a week ago. Again, sometimes we do rescues or we'll do evictions and trapping and removal. We do a variety of different services, but most often the case we'll trap and remove squirrels from a structure because they're one of those species that do a ton of damage. If you don't get rid of the female, and I'm not saying by saying getting rid of you lethally, sometimes it is lethally, sometimes it is live, but if you don't get rid of that target, that imprinted adult female squirrel, she'll keep coming back again and again. If you miss the boat on that, you'll continue to have damages from that. And so here in this picture on the left, we've got a female at the peak of this roof, and I've got a cage trap with a bunch of her juveniles in it. And she's eyeballing it like, hey, I'm gonna kick your butt. Give me my young back. So eventually she worked down, and that's a double-sided trap where she can go on the top. Gray squirrels, like I said, they're one species I won't evict. If you do evictions, then you're more than likely being sold a full exclusion, which there's nothing wrong with that. And what I mean by that, like squirrel proofing the entire structure. If you do an eviction and she still has young in the attic, she'll tear your house apart to get back to those young. Or even if she did leave, she could come back in the fall and on that attic that she's imprinted on and be there again to chew holes like that. Here, this picture on the right is a picture of a rake board where a squirrel chewed through the fascia, chewed through the 2x4 rafter, through the roof sheeting in the corner of the shingle, and got into the attic. Here's some other examples of squirrel damage. That's a louver vent corner. The homeowner got the young squirrels out of the attic, put them in the yard, but the female was like, nope, this is my house. I'm going to come back. She chewed, and you could see the homeowner put 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch hardware cloth back there, and the squirrel in frustration, once a squirrel imprints on a house, they can cause a lot of damage. They're furious about getting back in. So this squirrel chewed that entire louver vent up. Sometimes there's hidden spots, like this is up on a steep roof on the rear side of a house. You know, you'd have to be up close and personal to see that, where the squirrel chewed through some molding on a soft return to get into the attic. Another example of squirrels chewing through the rake return. Another louver event where they chew in. And honestly, there are a lot of wildlife control companies that miss the boat on this. Again, like understanding that majority of structural squirrel issues are females, and that if you don't get rid of that imprinted female, she'll keep coming back again and again. Serious squirrel damages. Over here on the left, you see the Romex wire chewed. And on the right there, you see that plumbing stack pipe that's been chewed clear down. The PVC's been chewed from the top down through the rubber boot. That's obviously a water issue, a water hazard issue. And then that over on the left is a fire hazard. Rodents are, you know, they'll chew on stuff, they'll tear up an attic. You know, typically I'll see where the damages come from the young that are, if you have floodlight Romex wire near a corner in the attic, the squirrels will chew that up and, you know, it can potentially cause a fire hazard. Out of sight damages, you know, they'll chew through roof decking, ridge vents. And in this case, this was a power ventilator, an attic fan where the squirrels had built a nest up underneath it, jamming the fan blades, causing the motor in that attic fan to burn up. So again, you know, wildlife removal, a lot of it, in my mind's eye, it's usually like a three-step thing is, you know, trap and remove the animal, repair if needed, and then animal proof behind that. So the solution here would be to remove the nest. You can pull the top of the vent off, remove the nest, and then clean out the debris and the nesting material, put the fan back together, the repair, and then put a vent guard over top of that. I didn't include any animal proofing and exclusion pictures because I didn't want it to seem like a cell. I wanted this to be about animals, their interactions with structures, and what they can do, and why operators are necessary and needed for helping people. Other attic dwelling critters. On the left, you've got the deer mouse, one of the most common attic dwelling critters that I see. It doesn't matter if I'm there for bats or squirrels. I almost always see some degree of evidence of smoky brown cockroaches and deer mice in people's attics. They're very well adept at climbing. There are native mouse. They'll go 80 foot up an oak tree to get acorns out of the canopy. They're nocturnal by nature, and they're very good at climbing, like I said. And so they'll end up in attics a lot. And people don't give this mouse enough credit for the amount of noise it makes. When I come back out of somebody's attic and say, oh, you have deer mice, they'll say, no way, I have squirrels or something. I said, no, you have deer mice. You know, I see the evidence of it. You'll see the runs in the insulation, the burrows. They can make quite a bit of noise, especially if they're up against the drywall scratching at night. You'll hear the drywall is like a sounding board, so it'll make quite a bit of noise. Southern flying squirrels, not many people are aware that we have flying squirrels. They're a nocturnal squirrel that we have in our area. And I don't get a lot here in Charlotte. We do a fair amount, but not as much as I've worked when I was in Winston-Salem and in the mountainous areas of the state. We would get a bunch of flying squirrel calls. And they're pretty common, you know, in different areas. But the one thing that they do is you'll hear them at night. Usually their witching hours like 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. You hear a lot of scampering and running around in the attic, a lot of thuds and bumps off the roof. Usually an indicator you have flying squirrels. There's a picture of a deer mouse. You know it's deer mice because they'll have a two-tone color. They're either a buckskin brown on top or a gray brown on top with a white underside. You can see the bulbous eye and the big ear, hence the name deer mouse. Here's some more examples of chipmunks, deer mice, flying squirrels. There's a litter. There's your typical litter of gray squirrels. It's 3 in a litter. If you build it, they will come. Now, this might fly in the face of hawk, and I hope it doesn't, but just be aware that if you build it, they will come. If you have bird feeders, which I do, I have a ton of bird feeders, but if you have bird feeders and habitat around your house and you attract all the different trophic levels of animals, you know, it's like if you have the songbirds they're feeding, you're going to probably have rat snakes and mice hanging around. There, seed spillage to the ground. There's going to be voles. There's going to be mice. There's going to be rat snakes. Wildlife lovers, wildlifers, they encourage that. They enjoy that, so long as they're not getting in their house and tearing it up. So just be aware that if you build it, they will come. So if you have bird feeders and stuff and habitat in close proximity to your house, just be aware that it could be, as the squirrel is sitting there on the attic than out here in this tree. And that's squirrels in a lot of different wildlife in urban and suburban zones. If they're born and raised in attics, they're habituated to attic spaces. They know about them. They want to use them as habitat. But just be aware, like most of the people that I see with lots of deer mouse issues have bird feeders. Contamination and fire hazards. You can see it on that left picture. This was flying squirrels in the attic. The attic was soaked with urine and droppings. This squirrel here on the right in that picture was chewing on a wire when I was taking that photo. Most effective solution. I put this slide in here because it's important to note. I went behind another company here. They did an eviction. They sold an animal proofing service, and they never got rid of that imprinted female. She came back. And even though the company did a good job of, animal proofing the house, the squirrel out of frustration chewed a hole through the window. That's not a spot that squirrels typically chew holes in. Anything could happen in this industry, but you can see there that that female was so frustrated that she just chewed up the window, chewed a hole down into the wall void, and, kind of left it after that. This one here, another kind of oddball spot where a company had evicted squirrels. They did all the animal proofing over the key areas where you normally have issues. And then the squirrel came back and just chewed out that entire area along the chimney in frustration to get back in. She moved her young back in there and back to square one. Raccoons. I do structural and open space management of raccoons in attic spaces, raccoons defecating in playground or daycare sandboxes, raccoons defecating in people's pools, raccoons rolling sod. There's lots of different types of issues that can arise with raccoons. There are a variety of problems. Most of the concerns: zoonotic diseases, structural damages, and contamination of spaces. When raccoons get into an attic space, they'll absolutely trash it. I've got some pictures of that. Number one vector of rabies. How do they get in? Well, raccoons will rip out shingle, tear holes in fascia, tear holes in the roof line. That picture in the middle and on the right is a picture of a power ventilator where the top is gone. Raccoons, during the spring when sows are ready to have young, they're ready to nest, they'll go above and beyond to get into structures. You'll see a lot of this coming soon. We've seen some of it already, but normally by the end of this month into May is when I really see the influx of raccoon calls start to come in, where females tear into attic spaces in various ways to get in there, create a den and nest, and then birth young. I wish I had the video. I looked for it, but I have a trail cam video. This area on this roof line, that main hole. See, this is 3 different species that started this. The hole up the trim there, you see higher up, that was downy woodpeckers that started in on that spot. And then lower down, the squirrels chewed it open, and then the raccoon came along, made the hole bigger. But that hole is only about that big around. That about a 12-pound raccoon was squeezed in his butt through. He'd climb up on a holly tree, get on the roof, scuttle across the roof, and it was amazing. You'd watch him come down the valley of the roof, get on that little hip of gutter there, and squeeze his body, and I'm talking like a 12-pound raccoon that big squeezing through a hole that big. It's pretty amazing the areas and places they can squeeze into. Raccoon goes in, finds a squirrel nest, kills the squirrels, some of them, not all of them, then takes over the attic space. So sometimes one problem starts as one thing, ends as another. This raccoon over here on the left, there's a kid here, but and I'm glad I didn't include a picture, but I call that the dirty magazine raccoon, because in this attic, there was a pile of old dirty magazines and he tore them to pieces and made a bed out of them. One of the most hilarious things I've ever seen. It was like I would walk into the attic with, with the owner, and like, it's kind of embarrassing for the owner too. He's like, I don't know where those came from. But I was like, oh yeah, that magazine there. But the raccoon in that job there, you can see there's a piece of the magazine there. He's peeking his head out of the soffit, and there was another one further down that went scuttling back. There was a couple of raccoons living in that attic. Here in the middle, raccoons and chimneys. In the springtime, you got to remember that raccoons are, I wouldn't call them an arboreal species, semi-arboreal. Green sites, they'll defecate and urinate in the same spot like a cat would. River otters do this, cats do this, flying squirrels have latrine sites. But you can see the amount of feces there is pretty significant. It's not in every raccoon dropping, but raccoons, we're talking about concerns and taking spaces. How are we going to solve this problem? What do we need to do? What's the solution? We need to trap and remove the animal. If the customer wants them taken away, by law, we have to euthanize them. That's the harsh reality we face, because if we evict and release on site, they'll go to the neighbors and do the same thing. And then the neighbor will come out and yell at the other neighbor. It's almost like, hey, it's like they almost like fuss at each other, like you gave me your disease. You gave me your house disease. Now I got to call him. Now I got to spend money. But, also, if you have an animal that has a habituated behavior that's causing problems where people's health is at risk, well, you have to have a sound solution to handle that problem. Unfortunately, we do have to euthanize raccoons. It's not the pretty part about our services, but it is necessary and needed. Not every raccoon job is we take them away and euthanize them. There are sometimes evictions. There are sometimes extractions by hand. But you could see where you don't want this to happen. You can see there's a couple of vents and fan ducts that those droppings are covering. And so you don't want to have raccoons living in your attic space. It's loading again. And I'll tell a story. Raccoons living in an attic. I had a job one time in High Point where as I hear something up there, I go to do an inspection, sure enough, it's raccoons. It was late April. I see that she's going in the power ventilator fan up on the roof, so I go and set a trap. This is like on a Monday, the beginning of a working week. And just leave it on that one.
All right, that's pretty rough. We'll go back to that.
It was beginning of a working week, and I set the trap and came back Tuesday, check nothing. And Wednesday, nothing. And then by the end of the day, Wednesday, the woman called me back later and they said, hey, what's the update? I said, we haven't caught anything yet. It's a sow raccoon, probably has young in there. She's probably nursing. You're just going to probably have to wait her out. When animals give birth, they'll nurse their young for the first few days. They may hole up. A raccoon may work off of fat reserves and be in an attic space for up to a week, not having to come out to get food or water. If she's in there nursing her young, then she'll just hole up. So by Thursday, the woman was very impatient. She's like, you need to come get this raccoon out of here now. I have family coming in on Friday. I don't want to contend with the noises. This is kind of embarrassing. She's like, you need to come get this thing now. So I'm like, okay. So I go back out there and I'm looking around in the attic. I can see where the animal's climbing down from the vent and going along the perimeter edge. And back, I see the trails go back into this corner. So I'm back on the floor joist there, working my way back to this corner where this trail goes. And as soon as I get up to this corner, I peek my head around and there's this big sow raccoon in the ball, like probably 3 or 4 feet from my face. And I had my little cat grabbers with me, and I had a catch pole back by the door and had a cage, thinking I was going to try to just grab this raccoon. But the area that I was in was such a tight space, I was kind of sprawled out. So I had my hands and knees braced on the joists in the attic, floor joists, ceiling joists. And when I stretch my head around, I click the light, I see her balled up. And as soon as the flashlight hit her, she kind of picked her head up and looked over her shoulder at me. And then as soon as she did that, I saw a couple of juveniles behind her pups move. And as soon as she started moving and stirring, the pups started getting upset. They'll make a noise they make like kind of like a cry noise. And that upset the female. You never get in front of mama bear and their kids. I don't care what species it is. There's a different level of adrenaline. And raccoons are kind of like miniature black bear in many ways, but they're not afraid to bluff or charge at you. So she turned around and came straight at my face, and I'm swinging my flashlight and yelling and cussing. And she finally dumped off and went down in the soffit and ran away from me. And I went ahead and grabbed the young, and as I was getting the young, I saw her scooting up the beam and went out the vent and went straight in the live trap. Trap went off. I got her, and then I grabbed all the young and put them in a little canvas bucket, and then carried them down. And I'll never forget, the lady was standing at the door, and she was like, "Oh my God, what was happening up there?" And I was sweating. I was like covered in sweat. My elbow was covered in blood because the adrenaline was kicked in. This raccoon runs at my face in an attic, and I'm like swinging my flashlight. And I didn't know I was hitting my arm off a stud. Cut myself wide open. So sometimes, you got to go above and beyond, but I'd rather not do that, especially for insurance purposes. Resume. That's that. Resume.
Yeah. It looks like we're not sharing anymore. Give me a quick second to try something here. We're on that. There you go. It doesn't, that's not an option.
This wasn't downloaded.
There you go. Down, pick the down arrow.
Yeah, so not to scare everybody, but with animals comes zoonotic diseases. I mean, they can damage your house in ways that can cost you thousands of dollars. Water damages, HVAC damages, plumbing, electrical. There's stuff that could harm you in your house, but one of the big concerns is zoonotic diseases. Raccoons, for instance, are a carrier of their droppings. They have literally thousands and thousands upon thousands of scarred roundworm. So if a kid is in a swimming pool and the raccoons are defecating in there and a kid gets it in there, a toddler's out playing in a sandbox at a daycare, puts sand in his mouth, and the raccoons are using it as a latrine site, you don't want to have that happen. So their zoonotic disease concerns are one of the big things about managing wildlife. Coyote and fox. The song dog, if you weren't aware, is the coyote. The coyote is one of the reason why I got in, along with the beaver, really, one of the main animals that got me into trapping and led me down this path. I have a lot of respect for coyotes and do far more education and technical guidance with coyotes than actual trapping and removal. But there are needs for it for sure. There are a lot of cultural methods and different types of things you can do to prevent issues with coyotes. But, this is an apex predator. It's an opportunistic predator. Nobody can speak with absolution about what they can and can't do. This is a picture of a coyote in a front yard in Valentine. once coyotes get up and live amongst people, or they're born and raised amongst urban and suburban environments where they're not hunted, they're not trapped, they're not shot at by farmers or deer hunters, they're not pressured or managed. They just become habituated to people. And sometimes they're a problem and sometimes they're not. But, the main concern with coyotes, and we've seen more and more on the news lately that there's been some attacks on toddlers and kids and people, but that's very rare. But most of the concern is with pets. Of course, there are a lot of things you can do to be a better pet owner and avoid conflicts and issues with coyotes. But I've seen enough now in my line of work to know that sometimes it doesn't matter how high your fence is. Remember the very first picture in the start of this presentation, that was an animal that was in NODA, and they're very intelligent animals. That animal, he would time when people would get off work, and he'd wait for homeowners to come home, let their little dog out. The dog would go into these smaller yards, how NODA is with the high fences. Then the dog would go out there and do their business. They'd go in there and whatever, and then come out, and the dogs were missing. Dogs were gone, just disappearing. And people for a while thought were, somebody was stealing them or they were getting out. But that coyote in that first slide, he was timing. He'd get up on the fence and he'd wait, and he'd see a door open, see a dog come out, and he'd go get it and be gone in a New York minute with that dog. And so if you have an animal that just, demonstrates problems, what is the solution? Well, what can we do? Well, we can't trap the coyote and relocate it because that's illegal. They're a non-native species anyways, and it wouldn't do you any good. You could take a coyote 100 miles from here, it could come right back. Big canines and predators have the ability to travel over great distances. But primarily when I work with this animal, it's properties or residential neighborhoods, or could be sometimes it's agricultural, folks that have issues with them, and it's not complete control. There's no such thing as complete control. There's a management. I hate to compare it to landscaping, but you don't mow the grass one time. If you're managing a species, it's done throughout time, over time, to mitigate the problem. Coyotes, they're pretty bold. If they're in and around people on a day-to-day basis, they'll lose their fear of man. It's larger breeds of dogs. They'll sometimes, they'll have a friendly encounter where, I've had plenty of people say, oh, I looked out my back door and there was a coyote face to face with my dog, and then they were chasing each other around and playing. And then there was another customer of mine that had an elderly boxer that was killed by a pair of coyotes. Coyote, you see over here on the right picture, this is your pair. Your coyote biology, normally a male and female will form a pair bond, set up shop in a given area, and they'll occupy and defend that zone. They'll have pups every spring, and then they'll kick the pups out in the fall. In the fall, the pups will disperse out and look for their own piece of the pie. Sometimes they'll go over great distances. There's been research where animals were radio collared in Georgia and ended up in Virginia. So they'll travel out. Sometimes you'll have a surrogate or a bay to hang around, usually a female, where you'll see, 3 or 4 of them together. But normally you have an adult pair that set up shop in an area. They defend that territory against other coyotes. And so sometimes you'll see territorial disputes with domestic dogs, but in that given zone, this opportunistic predator, they'll eat bird food, they'll eat fruits, they'll eat rabbits, squirrels, they'll eat roadkill. They help kind of manage the deer population in Charlotte, but they're there to eat, whatever opportunity they'll take advantage of. They're not a specialist. They'll just they'll gauge and measure any opportunity they see fit. Here he's got a little Jack Russell with a bite wound. This coyote jump up, he's coming after this cat. This is typical stuff you see with coyotes in urban environments, where they're like, if you have a dog and, nowadays, coyotes are here to stay. They're a part of our landscape forever. So if you have small pets, it's best to keep an eye on them, even in urban settings, because I do coyote removal everywhere. I've removed coyotes within a few blocks of the Panthers Stadium. I've done work in Noda, Myers Park, Foxcroft, Providence, Waxhaw. I've removed coyotes in different areas of the city. They're everywhere. So dogs unattended at night, cats that you let go outside, you're rolling the dice, you know, with coyotes these days. Now this picture cracks me up. There are things you can do as a pet owner, you know, to try to mitigate issues with coyotes. You can, I love this facial expression, like, what is this thing? It looks like he's getting ready to go to some wild rave or something. But you can do things to protect your pet, better animal husbandry techniques to prevent issues or attacks. And a lot of times I'll tell people that. And like I said, I do far more education and technical guidance with coyotes than removal. If somebody calls me and says, I saw a coyote in my yard, I'm like, so, you know, that understand that they're here and blah, 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 talk about biology. But if somebody says, I have a coyote that's here in my yard every day, he's been eyeballing my 2-year-old. He's been, or this coyote in TGK had one that chased a dog to a doggy door, ended up in the kitchen, scrambled, and somehow figured out to go back out. But the woman was standing in her kitchen and boom, it came through the doggy door. The dog, and right behind it come a coyote into the kitchen. So coyotes, you know, the more time that they spend around people where they're king, you know, they lose their fear of man and they habituate. There's a picture of a black coyote. If you're not aware, there are different color phases of coyotes, you know, some more blonde, more reddish. In this case, this is a jet black one. I've caught some black ones down in TGK before. I'm not sure. There needs to be more research on this, I believe, but I think that there is some mix of dog genes, coy dogs out there. There's a lot of people that say, oh, that's crazy talk, but I've seen coyotes that looked like they had shepherd markings. No coyote that ever came from the sandhills of Nebraska has ever looked like that. I do also believe that there's probably some mix with red wolves, because whenever I worked for the Wildlife Commission on the coast, I was right there near the heart of the red wolf reintroductory. And Chris and those folks who trapped red wolves and collared them, they also went through great lengths to trap coyotes, spay and neuter them, and try to keep the red wolf gene as pure as possible. It's a really tough task to try to manage that. But I mean, they had to track down red wolves that went to South Carolina. You know, they had to, those animals go, you know, you can't control wild animals on the landscape. It's really hard to do that. So I also think too, that there's some wolf genes, and there's been research with gray wolves and coyotes in the north where they have some coy wolf, but it's not as prevalent as everybody makes it out to be. There's a lot of misconception and myth on that as well. But coyotes, though, you know, you have a lab breed with another breed, that lab gene really stands out, right? You know, coyotes genes really stand out if they do happen to breed with another dog, which I do believe those occurrences take place. You see these, the coyotes genes are going to shine through more. Red and gray fox, red fox. Again, an animal, I do far more education. And if somebody has like a den of red fox underneath their porch or underneath their shed, like I had a job where I had a family of red foxes living in a woman's yard underneath the shed. And it was interesting to see their den site because, you know, you go there and you see all the different animals they eat. And, you know, you see like a rabbit head, a squirrel tail, you know, and you'll see pieces and parts of the animals. And then the fox pups would come out and play with them, you know, just like a dog chew toy. I mean, the reason you buy chew toys for your dog is because that's what they're, you know, they're all descendants of wolves. That's how they play and figure it out. That's how they become carnivores and predators, is they figure out the smells and the playing and chewing on things. The one interesting thing about that red fox family at that particular den site is that the dad, the male fox, was a big hunter of rat snakes. He'd bring back like 5-6 foot long rat snakes and just chew them into pieces. And then the pups would be throwing the pieces of rat snake in the air and playing with them. But the reason this became an issue where we had to trap is because, even though we tried to harass them and move them with dog scram and try to repel them and push them out of there, they just kept hanging around. And then they'd be jumping on the cars at night. There's fleas all over the yard, fleas bouncing off your shins. They're going through all these exhaustive efforts to try to get them to move, but they wouldn't. She would keep moving them around the property, and they'd be out there just wreaking havoc. So in that case, we did have to do a removal there. But in most cases, you can find cultural methods or harassment, hazing, or repelling techniques to push them out of that area. Gray fox. This gray fox came from a commercial facility where, like, I don't know. I don't know if he was rabid or not. I'd never sent him off for any kind of testing, but like, he was chasing people to their cars. I mean, the rabies is a two-phase disease where you have the dumb phase and then you have the furious phase, where at first, when the rabid virus, starts to take hold, they kind of look. They're kind of loose and gonna swaying around, and they're kind of in that dumb phase. They'll wander in circles and, they're just acting abnormal. The furious phase is when they're like charging at cars or attacking people, biting themselves. And so in that case, I had to remove that fox. But I don't do a terrible amount of red fox work or fox work in general. Possum and striped skunk. Possums, I call them the crawl space king. Possums will get into crawl space, they'll rip out foundation vents, they'll get up underneath air conditioning units like this one here, they'll go underneath the duct flange and get into crawl spaces, they'll tear the insulation down, defecate everywhere. If you ever had a flea problem but don't own pets, chances are you have a possum living in your crawl space. But I do quite a bit of work with them. With possums, you could technically, I would call them an omnivore, but they are a big carnivore. But what's interesting about possums, our only marsupial in North America, is that the rhabdovirus doesn't really survive well in their body. They have a lower body temperature than most mammals. They're a weird animal. They're really cool, but I got a lot of respect from them. They're not very pretty, but they're fascinating creatures. And they're not as, say, vigorous to get back into structures as, say, raccoons and gray squirrels are. So a lot of times we'll just do an eviction, or if I do trap and remove and get that problem animal out of there, we have the ability to relocate those. So in the woods behind my house in Mint Hill, I have to let go, I don't know, hundreds of possums. Skunks, do a little bit of skunk work, not a terrible amount. When I was living and operating in Winston-Salem, we did a lot more skunks. For whatever reason, we don't have a lot of skunks in the core of Charlotte. And I think maybe that has to do with just people and traffic and stuff. But what's odd is, like, up in Greensboro and High Point, Lexington, in and around people, Winston-Salem, there's plenty of skunk problems in those metro areas. But for whatever reason, in Charlotte, there are a few around, but you have to go out in Anson or Stanley or Cabarrus to see skunks more often. But skunks getting into crawl spaces, just like possums, will rip in there and make a den inside a crawl space. If there's feral cats around, sometimes they'll get into a territorial spat and spray. They'll do territorial sprayings. So we do some like deodorizing treatments and stuff, but mostly we'll trap and remove the animal, or evict the animal in this case, and then animal proof behind it. Beaver and muskrats, important wetland species, but in the wrong setting, has a lot of damages. This was a site, it's actually a brownfield site. There's contaminated materials underneath those ponds. The beaver were coming in and ripping into the pond liner. And like, that's a brownfield site. So beaver can't be tearing into those pond liners and causing toxins to get into the Catawba River. It's a no-no. So beaver cannot be relocated. There are beaver in every county in North Carolina. There's a tremendous amount of beaver in North Carolina. At one point, they were almost extinct. They were almost extirpated from the land. A lot of history behind beaver. A lot of this country, really, we're looking around here in modern day U.S., a lot of it was founded and built up because of the economics of beaver. Beaver pelts, bush lopers and colonists came here, trapped beaver, sold pelts to Europe, and that economy helped kind of fuel the expansion of the West. So like the beaver is, really responsible for a lot of big building aside from its aquatic wetland importance. But in the wrong setting, they can cause a lot of damage. Here in this case, this pond here in Valentine had all these nice ornamental plantings all around, and the beaver just went around and got them all. I mean, most of them. And so they're like, what can we do? Well, you know, you can try to wrap all the trees and stuff. And like the guy who's like Providence landscaper was like, we're not wrapping all these. He's like, how many trees are out here? I was like, well, you can try that, or we have to trap and remove. So then we trapped and removed beaver from that pond. Behind that fountain in the distance between the building and the pond, there's a big creek corridor. The beaver come up out of the creek and go out into those scapes and chew down the trees. And honestly, I have no hate for that. You know, there's no, I think that's kind of awesome. But when you're managing properties and there's ornamental plantings that are costing thousands of dollars, you know, you have to come up with a solution, right? Again, you know, what's the solution? What are the laws that we have to abide by to solve this problem? There's my 10-year-old son, River. He's standing on top of that beaver dam. That beaver dam was, I don't know, it's maybe 4 or 5 feet tall and about 50, 60 yards wide. And that was only about 100 yards from a driveway. So if this woman, she's away on business a lot, but she noticed that her creek was backing up, and one day, like the beaver, just overnight, they put a series of dams from that main beaver pond. By the way, that creek started no wider than those 2 doors. It started no wider than that, no deeper than maybe 2 or 3 feet. And the beaver plugged that, the water came up into the floodplain, and they just kept adding all that till they got to that. 50, 60 yards long. If you ever see one of those in person, it's impressive. You walk around the wildlands, North Carolina, you come across a 50-yard long beaver dam in the woods. It's just incredible to see, really. But they put a series of dams in, and then eventually they put a plug of mud and sticks in the culvert pipe that went under her driveway, and the water came up. And one morning, she's like, it's early, she's off to the airport. She can't even get out of her driveway because it's all flooded. And so beaver cause a lot of damage. Here you go. There's a typical area where they've got sticks and debris shoved in there, and the water can't flow. The water backs up. So I've done work for, you know, timber growers. You know, if beaver in a swamp there and they plug up an area and it causes the water to back up, and they're losing pine timber, you know, merchantable time, loblolly pine, crops. You know, we have farmers will, you know, they'll flood crops and lose crops. You know, they'll chew down trees. I always say everybody's a soldier until there's a war. And what I mean by that is a lot of times if somebody and I had a job in a community where beaver were chewing down trees around a pond, and the trees are falling in people's yards and crushing fences, and they're just wiping out the trees. They're wanting to make a little mini wetland down there. So the HOA called me in, what can we do? I said, these are options we can trap and remove, and, you know, be aware that you may continue to manage, you know, you're probably going to call me back as more beaver show up. And people in the community were like, no, how could they have to kill them. They can't relocate them, blah, 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 and just let them be. And, you know, but if a tulip poplar this big that they're working on, they chew it and it falls on your house and kills you, well, you have to have a solution, right? What's the solution? So, you know, they do lots of respect for beaver and all wildlife. And they're very important wetland species, but in the wrong setting, they can do a lot of damage. And it's not just, you know, trees that they chew down. It's also flooding concerns. Muskrat damages, not near as bad as say beaver, but they'll burrow into the embankments. In this situation here, you can see where muskrat have gone up on this bank and they're chewing out the fescue roots. That's clear indication of muskrat. They're a herbivorous aquatic mammal. The biggest concerns with them is where they, you know, they'll burrow up into dams and dikes. And if you have a dam holding a tremendous amount of water in a stormwater pond or a big pond above a community, and they're putting little holes in it over time, and that's weakening the dam, you got to come up with a solution, right? What are we going to do to manage this problem? Also, heavy equipment. If mowing equipment or trucks drive over a den, because a lot of times muskrat den, the burrow will come in at the water line and go up into the ground, and there will be an excavated cavernous den in there. And if you drive over with heavy equipment, it could cave in. I actually had an incident with when I worked at the Wildlife Commission at J. Morgan Futch, the place I told you about the red wolves and bears are at. They have these narrow little dikes that we have to drive our trucks on. I'm talking, there's no room for error. It's like a steep embankment down into a deep black water canal. And I was driving my rig and I had all this water in the back for a prescribed burn that we'd done. And I'm driving along and I was actually looking for, checking out just inspecting the dikes. And the truck, because it had all that weight in the water in the back, hit a muskrat den, and the truck did this, and it caved in, and the truck tipped, and I was about to roll over into the canal. I had to literally climb out of the passenger side window and go and let all the water out of the tank, and then call my crew leader. They say, hey, almost died on that one. So muskrats, we trap and remove muskrats, or, cultural methods. What can we do to, long-term, long-term solutions to prevent it from reoccurring? You can put in riprap. I should have put a picture in here, but I did a job at Lake Norman where these muskrats are coming up the seawall and going in these pipes and then chewing out the irrigation pipes and the drainage pipes from the inside. And then they chewed the pipes out and then burrowed from the pipe into the lawn, because she had a fence along the seawall, but the muskrats were determined to eat her luscious, beautiful grass, right? So what we did there is we didn't have to do anything, but I put some one-way doors in just in case there were muskrats in there, let the muskrats let themselves out. And then we came back with stainless steel vent covers and put them over those holes in the seawall. Didn't have to trap or do anything there. But just another species we deal with. Cultural methods, again, this is a beaver pond leveler. Some of these slides are not very good. I pulled this off the internet. A beaver pond leveler is where, you have a pipe that goes through the base of the beaver dam. You have on the upstream side, you have this guarded perforated holes cut in the pipe where the water can flow through. And then you have a water leveler on that side. When the water gets up to a certain point, it'll allow it to drain through. The problem with this, even though you can let the beaver stay there and the dam and the water levels are controlled by this pond leveler, they're still there chewing down trees, right? So in some situations you can get away with this, others not. Bats. Do a lot of work with bats. I think they're a fascinating species, critter. They're federally protected. We cannot poison, we cannot trap or remove, and for good reasons, obviously. They're an ecological important species. They're nature's pest controller. Structural evictions for this species only primarily deal with big brown, little brown, and Mexican free-tailed bats in structures. And so what we do there is we'll do a bat eviction. We'll go and seal up a structure, install one-way tubes. One-way tubes or valves. Now let's see if this goes back. Yeah. So here's the case for these bats. You can see these are big brown bats in a louver vent. They're loaded inside that louver vent. They're using the vent as a place to hang out, form a maternal. This is a maternal colony here. You can see the guano packed in the bottom of the vent. But what we'll do is we'll install screens on the outside and put cones or valves in to allow the bats to exit but not regain entry. And the concerns with bats are mostly, urine and guano accumulations in structures, like you can see here in this picture. Over here, this is a commercial facility with years and years of bat guano in there. Odor concerns, zoonotic diseases like histoplasmosis is a fungus that grows inside the guano. So if you disturb that guano and aerosolize it, it can cause issues, respiratory issues. The disease can be hard to beat too. It can cause a lot of problems. Kind of like pregnant women can't scoop cat litter because of toxoplasmosis. More significant fungus with bat guano. So that's, and even though it's less than 2%, bats are carriers of rabies. So you don't want bats living in your structure because of all those reasons. But it's important that they're protected, that they're properly handled and properly evicted. The unfortunate thing for most clients though is they have to spend the money to seal up their house. Yeah, wrap it up. Okay, more bats, nuisance birds. How much time do I have, Daniel?
Take your time.
Okay, nuisance birds real quick. Does everybody remember flight 1549? US Airways took off out of LaGuardia. hit a bunch of geese. Geese went through the turbines, plane went down in the Hudson River. You have to manage birds in different spaces, structural, open space. Primarily non-native nuisance and introduced species are typically the bird species we deal with most, even though we do deal with woodpeckers and nuthatches tearing up people's homes. There's no lethal removal there. What we'll do there is put in like deterrents, visual deterrents to keep the bird away and do the repairs. But a lot of times they will put a lot of pressure on a house. Bird management, resident geese, hazing and harassment, deterrence removal. Pigeons, we do a lot of pigeon work with keeping them out of structures. Again, not unlike bats, they're accumulations. This is a picture of starlings where they're depositing nesting material in an attic. That's a couple years worth of nesting material. Starlings are just nonstop. Amazing, isn't it? That was like 8 contractors' bags worth of grass we took out of that attic. Dropping accumulation, slip fall hazard, zoonotic diseases, contamination, erosion, acidic droppings. You got this owl over here, this fake owl with the pigeon's laughing at the owl. Gulls, you guys wildlifers are gonna love this one. The gulls, my buddy out of New England sent me this one. Okay, so gulls hanging on roofs, they're nesting on roofs, dropping accumulations, hazing harassment, but the best controller was that one. Snowy owl was killing the gulls. He'd come down and was grabbing them off the roof. That was pretty cool. I thought I'd share that one. Damages utilities, English sparrows in dryer vents, bathroom exhaust vents. That's all burning. That's all grass material that those birds deposited in that vent. Snakes. Does anybody guess what species that is? That's a black racer. Open structural, most feared Ophidiophyliobia or something like that. I can't say it right.
That juvenile black racer.
Yeah.
That would look like when they're born.
That one's getting ready to shed its skin. That's why his eye was all milky there. But that's a juvenile. That's a fresh out of an egg, not too long out of an egg. Rat snakes and structures. That woman was like, I'm not going back home, honey, until you get rid of that problem. Those little rat snakes got up in the attic and then they found their way through a tray ceiling into that bathroom where they were like, this is the best place to have, romantic snake love. It's right here in this whirlpool. Copperhead, the only venomous snake in our area that we have to be worried about. Here's a cool job where the guy's like, I was out there in my shed, I saw something move, and I'm pretty certain it was a snake, and I just left. So sure enough, you look kind of down there in the center. This copperhead was laying in some cardboard. And of course, the reason he was there was because of deer mice. Now, this is cool. I caught this copperhead on a job, and then I caught the king snake on another job. And the king snakes will eat copperheads and other species of snakes. And whenever I was holding that king snake up next to the glass, he could smell him and he could see him, and he was hitting the glass. He wanted to get that copperhead and eat it. It was pretty neat. Miscellaneous encounters. Sometimes owls come down chimneys and fly into people's houses. That one, hey Daniel, thank you for that call there. You sent me that one. Yeah, the one on the left. Yeah, that was pretty cool. We get calls for that kind of stuff. Yeah, fairly often. Hey, who can come help at a raptor center? Usually people's number one call. A lot of times they're just inundated, they can't help. Yeah, I always recommend them as well. I found an owl that got struck by a vehicle, or right. But a lot of times in the spring when owls, when barred owls are chasing each other or they're looking for places to nest, more often than not, it's where they're like perched on top of a chimney flue and another one buzzes them and he goes and ducks and they'll end up down in the chimney flue and then down in that one I got out of a chimney damper there. Had to kind of power through that. That's it. I know I kind of raced through it there at the end, but I could talk for a couple hours. I try not to get too marble mouth and mumbled, but like I could talk on gray squirrels for 2 hours.
Question about the economics of several squirrel damage. What are we looking at in terms of dollar cost?
So the way that gray squirrels are handled by me, and I'll tell you about our industry. So what I do for gray squirrels is the minimum and then full coverage if it's absolutely needed or people want it. So the minimum is 3 things: trap and remove the squirrels at the entry point,
then repair and animal proof that one spot. All those rake returns and stuff I showed you where they chewed in, the female squirrel will pick that one spot and chew a hole in, right? So now if you let squirrels live there for a length of time, if you're unaware or you ignore a gray squirrel problem, they'll turn your attic into Swiss cheese. But normally most fresh problems are one area that they chew into. So the minimum is that two or three line item service, we trap and remove, repair, and then animal proof. That's your minimum. Usually services like that start at $600 and usually can take up to a week or so to complete. Because I have to come there, do the inspection, then come set traps, come check the traps every day. Sometimes we may be there for a week. Another time, have to come work on the weekends if I'm actively trapping. And so it just varies. Full coverage, I don't want this problem again. This is my third squirrel problem I've had. Now, well, we could squirrel proof your house, shield all the soffit returns, all the rake returns, vent guards, basically squirrel proof the upper portion. Those jobs could be in excess of $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. I mean, I'll go to these houses in Waxhaw and they look like castles. They have like 50 soffit returns. I'm like, we're going to be here a couple of weeks. I mean, you'll go to these houses in South Charlotte, and they're on a 12-12 pitched roof, slate roof, and you're like, we have to get up there on using roofing equipment to access it, and the price goes up. But one important thing to know about gray squirrels, especially here in Matthews, one neighborhoods that is rotten with squirrel problems is Providence Plantation. Like that neighborhood means two things to me: deer and squirrels in the attic. Like that neighborhood has got a bunch of problems because there are a lot of people out there that are either unaware or ignore a problem. The same Korean couple, I've been going by their house for 8 years now. I go by their house and talk to them and give them the business card. For the last 8 years I've been in business, I drive by the same holes in their house year after year. That female squirrel that's in that attic, she's pumping out 2 to 3 litters a year, 2 to 6 in a litter, 50-50 sex ratio. Half of them are females. The female is the more dominant of the two. The male has nothing to do with rearing the young. The female gets to choose the best nesting cover. Attics are the best and most secure nesting cover. 99% of structural squirrels use females in spring and in the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, and into the winter. I mean, the only time I catch a break from squirrels is like July, because the spring litter starts in January, February, and builds, and it's like now we're at we have dozens of squirrel calls going right now, and then it'll kind of wane off into June, and then right there, August 3rd, 4th, 5th, here comes the fall litter. 45-day gestation period, big litter size. They're the French fries of nature. Everything eats them. High fecundity, big litters, quick reproductive effort. Understanding all that, know that squirrels, if you live next door to somebody that's unaware, ignoring, I call them the vector. If you live next door to the vector, you're going to feel the pressure. So I may do the minimum, $750, $800, $900, $600, do the minimum, but then you may call me a year later. And that's where different companies do different things. Like there's a few companies out there, they do all or nothing. They look at 10 jobs a week, only win 2, because they're selling full exclusion, and they're selling the benefits of it. There are benefits of it, and they talk about, well, if we do this whole thing, you're going to be animal proof against rat snakes, deer mice, bats, the whole 9 yards. And that's a great business model, but people have lives and budgets. Not everybody can just drop that money or want to spend that money, and they'd rather just risk it. There's lots of people that I do the minimum for. Most people with gray squirrels, I do the minimum for. Now, if I go talk to friends with NACOA, they're going, Andrew, you're doing it wrong. You need to do it this way. Like, well, I keep plenty busy doing this, and I'd rather not just be this all or nothing company, because guess what? I still have to run a business. And when times get hard and the economy tanks or something again, I can't be this company that does all or nothing, because nobody's going to pay for your services. Right. So I build a bigger network. That's my idea, is more of the security net. But also, it's not just strictly business. Like, people appreciate honesty, being flexible, and going to doing a solid service, rather than going, oh yeah, you need to do it because you're gonna guarantee you're gonna have another one. Now, maybe if you live next door to the one couple's house that doesn't do anything about it, yeah, I might be back out there, but can't speak with absolution about what animals can and can't do, what they're gonna do.
So removing all of the, not only fixing the carpentry work that you talked about earlier, not only fixing it, but then removing all of the insulation and removing it and sterilizing. I imagine you guys have to have some pretty crazy.
Oh, yeah, the PPE and the safety equipment. Honestly, I have 2 guys, I have 2 technicians, but full scale restoration, I'll give to another company. Another wildlife and pest control company. I'll do localized cleanups, but if it's like a huge contaminated space, just shredded attic. Because you think about animals in an attic, I mean, if you have fish or hamsters, right? You gotta clean the filter with the fish, it gets dirty and nasty over time. Hamsters, you gotta change out the litter. Well, animals living in a space, that's a fish tank or a hamster cage. Over time, they just contaminate and trample insulation, energy goes down, your utilities get damaged. Like a squirrel problem could be a $750 fix at minimum, but if you ignore it, it could be a $50,000 problem where they did problem to your insulation. They did, and if you ever go to sell the house, and that's why you should always be cautious on the quick sale, that they didn't do an inspection on it. Because if you ever go to sell a house, the inspector comes in and goes, oh yeah, well, you know, you got this mold, you got black mold over here, and you got this problem over there, but guess what? You also have a colony of Mexican free-tailed bats in here that need to go. And they got guano all in there, and you have all cleaned up. So don't ever ignore a problem. Yeah. We do. My primary focus is on like trap remove, repair if I need to. What I constitute as a repair is like mending, fixing, replacing existing structural features like sections of siding or shingles and you know, my father-in-law, and we have a general contractor's license to do that stuff. And so I work kind of with him if I have to do structural repairs, but where I shine is my animal proofing services, where we do customary work or prefabricated product installation. But we'll do some cleanups here and there. But if it's like a trashed attic, especially like these rental properties I go to, where it's like the owner lives in California, and like we're trying to like, hey, and they another discussion there, but like they'll be totally trashed, and I say, hey, you know, send this on to somebody else. But I'll from time to time I'll do occasionally I'll do a big cleanup, but it takes, you know, setting up a barrier wall. You got to raise the poly curtain. You got to run an air scrubber into the attic. We got to get a high power vac system. I don't go into the living space with my hoses. We'll either cut a hole in the roof or take the fan off, run the hose from the truck and the trailer up a ladder, zip tie the hose to the ladder, run the hose across the roof into a vent, go in there with full respirators, Tyvek suits, and get in there and just start sucking it all out and listen to the raccoon turds go scuttling by to the hose. But
Yeah, you gotta do it. I mean, you gotta protect yourself. I mean, the notion of having PPE in a 180-degree attic, which is the other thing I'm kind of curious, is that this time of year, they're interested in an attic where the attics are getting hotter and hotter and hotter, as opposed to, I can appreciate them trying to break in during the winter time. You know, raccoons trying to get a little bit of, it's 10 degrees, we made it down to 10 this winter. That's a brutal time to try and live outside. So I can see that being attractive, but it's a time of year.
Answer that real quick and I'll answer your question. See, a lot of it is weather dictated, temperature, seasonal. They'll come in for denning and shelter, right? But a lot of wildlife going into spaces and structures is driven by the birthing cycle. Like when that sow raccoon is ready to drop her young, she's gonna go, it doesn't matter if that attic is 120 degrees. But that's where I said it'd blow your mind what they'll do. They'll rip holes in the HVAC and have cool air blowing on their nest, or they'll go and get in the soffit where the thermal envelope of your house will suck air up and blow it across the attic. Or if you notice, like when early in the season, when it's still chillier nights, the bats will be on the sunny side of the attic and the louver than over there. But as it gets hotter and it's June, they'll switch to the other side of the louver vent. Or where a prevailing wind will suck through one louver vent and blow out the other. So like they're getting a nice cool breeze here, but if they're cold, they'll just go around to the side where it's blowing hot air past them. So animals you know, I know it's kind of hard to believe, but they think about those things. They utilize structures and barometric pressure and temperature and air currents. They'll utilize them.
You know, you mentioned the bats, so when you do an eviction on the bats, because they're protected, of course, you can't harm the bats, and for the most part, they're not too bad a disease vector when you're talking about rabies. They do have rabies to some degree, but they're a danger, which is why they're protected, right?
Right.
Do you
Some
guys,
species are, some aren't,
Right.
but they're protected across the board.
and with the white nose disease, so many are getting like that, but do you guys encourage folks to install bat boxes? If you got bats, in fact, we all have bats in our neighborhoods, kind of see them if you're paying attention. It does.
I do get that a lot. If you put a bat box out on its own, it might fill up with stinging insects more faster than it does bats. If you have a bat box close to where you have the roost, they tend to be more successful. But if you have a house right next door that's available or somewhere down the road, they're just gonna go to another house. But bat boxes do have some efficacy, and they do, you know, I've seen that they've had success. But, you know, if you put a bat box, say they were in a litter bin and we moved them out of the vent, but you just mount a box on the side of their house, just be aware that you're gonna have to pressure wash and clean the urine and the guano off the side of your house. Now, this woman that I did work for, she was kind of sad because where her knockout roses were below this one area where bats are going in, and those were the best looking knockout roses on the street. And she was like, I was like, oh yeah, the reason they look so good is because these bats are flying in that here defecating and urinating, like the best fertilizer ever. Yeah. That's where the expression, I'm sure you've heard, sorry kid, but you know, batshit crazy comes from, is that, you know, the bat guano and its value, people really wanted it. You can buy bat guano online. If you need bat guano, it's fine.
Well, I was curious because they're already coming to that space. They're already imprinted on that house. You
Right,
just don't want them in the structure. You want them. So I
right.
didn't know if that neighborhood or if part of it is, all right, well, let's get some bat boxes. So I know I've got folks who ask me about bat boxes all the time, and they install them and they stay there. Or wasps move in, or, I mean, it's shelter for the critter. So other critters are gonna take, you know, find it and say, hey, this is a good little spot.
It's just hard to get them to move from a structure. And again, bats are, a lot of them are born and raised in attics, in soffit boxing and wall boards, in the plenum behind brick veneer, in louver vents, deep in attics. They use them for hibernating in the sun, in the wintertime, in the warm season, they're using them as shelter for maternal colonies. They know about it.
Right.
As soon as they leave through that tube and can't get back in the house, they're gonna go find another house. And that's where people also cuss, that guys come out like, you gave me Johnny's bats. like Johnny's house gave you some kind of like wildlife disease. That's the years of them, you know? And it was, and you're like, no, well, this is the way we have to operate, this is to protect it, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, I get cussed a lot, like, oh, your business is a scam, you're just moving these bats around so you can charge people out of money. Like, I can't predict where they're gonna go, they're gonna go anywhere, but, you know, this is the way we have to handle them, this is the solution, if you want to do bat proof. Because, yeah, bat guano, I had a job where bat guano filled up from like ground level all the way almost to the gable on this really tall brick house. She ignored bat problems for a long time. And there was bat guano collecting in the plenum between the subwall and the brick veneer. And whenever it got humid, her house would smell like bat urine and bat guano. It was bad. I remember I walked up and said, "Well, you get Mexican freetails," because they have a certain smell. Freetails will fly way in high up at night. They'll get like kudzu bugs and flying beetles and stuff. So like they fly and hunt at a certain stratosphere, I guess you could say. And so they have this unique smell to their guano. It's this very obnoxious, like perfumey smell.
Yeah, if they're getting kudzu bugs, those things happen.
There you go.
Right.
Exactly. So they're flying over those bean fields and wax all at night, loading up on kudzu bugs, and then they're going back. But I remember going in her house, I was like, "You've got Mexican freetail bats." She's like, "Huh?" And so we went up there, sure enough. And that job where you know, if you really wanted to get that smell and guano out of there, you couldn't open up this living space anymore. You had to tear all the brick out. Talk about defacing an entire brick gable. Scaffolding goes up. now comes the wall.
It's deferred maintenance. I mean, just like anything, if you don't take care of your car, it's only that much more expensive to take care of it when the wheels come off, so.
Yeah, I don't mean this flippantly or say it in a crass way, but I always say too, like, might be a harsh way of saying it. I said, nature wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire. Nature will take care of itself. It will, if you don't do anything to your house, the plants, the bugs, the insects, the animals will take over your house. They'll utilize it for their benefit. They don't care about your feelings. We're the only species that cares about nature, right? And so you have to mitigate and manage the problem, or else it'll just take over. You don't, you see that with all kinds of things. It could be roots into the foundation of water, or insects, carpenter bees, termites, stinging insects, squirrels, rodents. They'll take over your house and use it to their benefit. So, yeah, if you ignore problems, they'll result in, in bigger ones. But that's too where, like, again, talking about trapping, removal versus eviction and stuff. Somebody pays me money to get rid of their squirrel problem, and then it comes back because we did an eviction, or the squirrel got mad, and even though we sold her the eviction and sold her a big job, a $2,000 job that's squirrel proof her house, and the squirrel comes and chews up all the windows. That's why I don't do evictions with squirrels. But yeah, you're constantly there needs to be a balance between humanity and nature. I love wildlife. I love nature. I'd rather be out there, on a big snowbird and then a hail of fly fishing and looking at the birds. I'd rather be on the coast on OBX on the South Core banks, looking at shorebirds and sitting drinking, a beer on the beach. I'd rather be there in nature, enjoying that stuff than anywhere. I have the utmost respect and love for nature, but you also have to, in these environments, this is where you're at that, that balance of things.
Balance is the key, yeah. One thing that I think that overarching theme of what you were talking about is go into your attic every once in a while. Take a poke around before it becomes a big problem. You nip it at the bud before it's, you got 3 litters of 3 to 6 growing in your house, in your attic every year.
Yeah.
So take care of a problem before it's a problem, when it's a little problem. So I really appreciate it. You guys have any other questions for Andrew?
I was gonna,
You got a question?
my question kind of leads off of what Dan just said. So to the average homeowner like myself, what are the things that you should be looking for on a somewhat routine basis to detect these kinds of things?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, if you have some type of wildlife problem in your structure, you're going to hear it or smell it. You probably see something that stands out. Like bats might be less obvious, but if you go out and if you're sitting on your patio at night and you see bats coming off your roof line, like you see like 60 bats flying off the roof line, something's going on there. You hear something scuttling around, or you hear something, on a consistent basis. If you see like something chewed on, or paint missing, or you see like a stain, like let's say a lubricant, and you see like it looks like somebody took a dirty hand and smudged on a white lubricant on your house. You look at it and like, well, why is that dirty like that? It was sebum from bats rubbing on the wood and staining it. But more often than not, if you're a diligent, homeowner, and you're looking at your house and checking things out, you'll probably hear, see, or smell something in the crawl space. Sometimes it's subtle, especially if it's a new problem. Like I heard, some people are very hypersensitive about things, and they'll hear something and be like, I need you to come look at it. And I'll see like one little ear mouse trail where they came into the attic one time. They're like, good on you. But so
I really appreciate you coming out and talking with us, because this kind of stuff is really interesting. It's not always the most pleasant interaction, right?
sure.
But it's certainly what we are dealing with, and that balance is always a challenge, as opposed to a complete eradication of everything. It's like, well, how do we live together, and
Sure.
knowing their behaviors and all that kind of thing as well. So thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. And we, if you guys wouldn't mind helping us grab the chairs and hanging them back up over there, because we're gonna go ahead and get kicked out of here in just a few minutes. So it's good timing.